Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from, when you just feel blessed, you just know it. It's just something about life that brings you the beauties amidst all the crazy that is living. But, there are moments where you just sit in the park and have a conversation with an interesting person. And that's what we're here for today. We are in Prospect Park, which is near and dear to my heart as a runner, a walker, a player, whatever you want to call it, in the recreation space of Brooklyn life. And I am here with someone who I think is a little bit newer to this park. So I will share some tips on the love affair I've had with it for my entire life living in New York at some point. But let's get to his bio and take it from there. He has spent his career operating at the intersection of diplomacy, security, and political legitimacy, working across national, regional, and multilateral systems to resolve conflict, build institutions, and negotiate power. As Kenya's permanent representative to the UN, he served as president of the Security Council and the executive board of UNDP, UNFPA, and UNOPS. In the Security Council address of February 2022, delivered on the eve of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and viewed by millions, it was affirmed as a core element of his leadership, the ability to bring moral clarity and strategic grounding to moments of international rupture. Earlier in his career, he directed Kenya's National Counterterrorism Center and served as the president's special envoy for countering violent extremism, advising 3 presidents through national and regional crises, from emergency evacuations to constitutional brinkmanship. This year, he stepped into a new role as president and CEO of the Africa Center in New York City, marking a new phase of his work where diplomacy, strategy, and narrative converge. At the same time, he continues to engage with the global African diaspora as president of the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. Ambassador Martin Kimani, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's fantastic being here. And may I just comment that you are the brightest human being in the park today, because you are in this beautiful bright orange and it's standing out against all the leaves. You look great.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought about that when I was putting on my colors, that I still wanted to bring the color because we're in autumn officially. So thank you. Appreciate that. So let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
I was born and raised in Kenya. I consider Kenya to be where I'm from. Where am I local? That is such a great question. I'm local on 110th Street and 5th Avenue in Harlem, which is where the Africa Center is. I'm local here in Brooklyn on Parkside Avenue next to Prospect Park, which is where I have my home and raise my children. And I'm also local in Kenya because I'm constantly worried about this or that issue going on back home, or celebrating something, or in touch with my relatives.
And what is your craft?
My craft is I'm a professional African. In other words,
it's a new one.
My work writ large is the articulation and the implementation of Pan-Africanism institutionally and politically, and giving it space globally, and navigating the global system to ensure that Africa and Africans have their rightful place in the world. And because Africa gave me everything I have, Africa educated me, Africa raised me, and I think I was raised to do this. So that's what I do.
I love that. You said you are a professional African, right?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, we have African professionals, but to be a professional African, we're going to go more into that. But let's drill in a little bit, because I have a new love affair with Kenya. I've been there twice this year. I will be there again next year, early in the year. And so tell us about your from in Kenya, and then where your real local is in Kenya, because it's a big country. Tell us more.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Mombasa and raised partly there and in Nairobi. I'm an urban person, but in the curious way in which we think of home, home is where traditionally in amongst the Kikuyu people who I come from, home is where your father is from. So in that way, I'm from just outside Nairobi in a place called Kiambu.
Oh.
But my more rural home is on the foot of Mount Kenya in Nyeri, where my mother bought a farm, and that's where we used to go and visit during our holidays. And so that feels closer to home. So home, the local in Kenya, is both where you live, where you were born, where you were raised, and also where your clan or your people come from.
Touch your Kenyan bracelet.
Yes, yes.
The flag is close to your heart always, huh?
Well, Kenyans have gotten this habit, which has become very widespread, of wearing their flag, a part of the flag on themselves, especially as wristbands. And this was popularized by President Kenyatta. But it's worn by millions of people, and it's become even a sort of fashion outside Kenya. And non-Kenyans wear it as well, like as a fashion item. And for a people that famously think of themselves as not patriotic, the behavior itself suggests that there's a deep well of pride and patriotism amongst Kenyans.
Oh. So why do you say that Kenyans don't typically think of themselves as patriotic?
Someone once described Kenya as a state in search of a nation, because Kenya, of course, exists because of colonization, and Kenya is an invention of the British Empire. And so by the time we got our independence, we did not have a national ideal, a national understanding of ourselves. That had to be shaped politically. The very first independent Kenyans, the leaders, when they used to be asked, what's your political philosophy? They used to describe themselves as African nationalists. They didn't describe themselves as Kenyan nationalists because there was no such thing. And so that patriotism, I think, is the fruit of the political efforts to shape it, the educational system, and also sort of the accomplishments that individual Kenyans have had, especially athletes.
I get it. Interesting. So let's center you at home and then put you on a plane, train, or an automobile that carried you away from Kenya to come back to Kenya. So what does it take to become a professional African? Where did you start that journey?
I think I started that journey in high school, and I started it by being a bit of a rebel. I went to one of Kenya's more what are called national boarding schools, which are a small group of elite schools that are very conformist. You have to behave a very particular way. And I found there with one of my great friends that we had a really different idea of what we wanted to do. We wanted to do theater. We wanted to dare authority. We wanted to test the limits, not in terms of anything untoward, but with our ideas, with our art, with our theater, with just the way we carried ourselves. And I think that just carried through when I left high school and went to college and had this burst of political consciousness. And my first political consciousness was really Pan-Africanism. And so it was so strong that it shaped my education, it shaped my worldview, and therefore it shaped my work and ultimately my professional aspiration.
So when did you first leave Kenya as you understood who you as a Pan-African were?
I left Kenya at the age of 19 with a money order for $500 in my pocket, a scholarship from a university in New Hampshire, and a determination to come and study business administration and accounting, which collapsed within 6 months. And I started studying philosophy instead. But I was 19 when I got to the US.
Okay. And you stayed?
That initial period in America, I stayed for 12 years.
Wow. It's a good part of your adulting.
Yes. Yeah. I lived in New Hampshire for school. Then I went to Boston briefly, entered the field of financial management, ended up in New York working for a hedge fund, and left the year in 2002 after 9/11, which was a big event for me.
Yeah.
And went off to London to go to graduate school.
Yeah. So when you say 9/11 was a big event, I don't talk about that experience for myself very much. And we're kind of, a month out from that, the commemoration of it. It's more than 20 years now, right? And so what about that as a big event changed you or was part of your reason to leave? Because a lot of people that I knew left after that. And so how did that relate to your leaving?
Well, 9/11 did not make me leave. In fact, 9/11 made me love New York even more. I loved New York. The first time I ever visited New York, I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And when the nightmare of 9/11 happened, I was on a train, a C train coming from my house in Brooklyn heading to work. And when I came out of the train station, the whole world had changed. And what made me really fall even more deeply in love with New York was that the reaction to 9/11 was not rage in New York. It was questions. There were real questions.
Yeah.
People were wondering, how did this happen? Why did it happen to us? What is it that has made the world, people so angry that they could perpetrate such a horrific act of violence in our city? And there was a real sense of coming together as New Yorkers. And that made me really have a deep sort of love for New York. And of course, it also made me very curious about political violence. And this had been a subject sitting in the back of my head since the 1994 Rwandan genocide, when I was in college. And we would sit in the dorm looking at these images on CNN. And my dorm mates would ask, Martin, this is near Kenya. Why are they doing this? What's happening? And I had no answer for them. And I read everything I could read about it, but I still had no answer for them. And so this event on 9/11 really brought me back to thinking again about political violence and its roots. And so when I left in 2002, it was to go to grad school to really study that.
Yeah, interesting. And study you did. You went all in on many subjects and you've emerged as a professional in security, right?
Yes, I went and did a master's and a doctorate in war studies at King's College London, which was the most intellectually free academic environment to inquire about violence. The curiosity that was allowed me to focus on violence itself, not peace, not resolving violence, but violence itself. And I studied that. And I like to say a PhD, this is my own definition. You ask yourself a question, you answer yourself, you're supposed to be original while you're doing it. Your question is your ego.
Okay.
Your answer is your ability.
Okay.
And the gap between the two is what constitutes the level of stress that doing a PhD involves.
Right.
So I can assure you, mine was incredibly stressful.
So did you learn quite a bit about how to start to work and build teams in that time?
No, not at all. I mean, in fact, my PhD process was a pure process of theory and intellectual endeavor. I had no practical ends or ambitions for what I was doing. I studied genocide. I was writing on the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
And that led me to a very in-depth and lengthy study on race and racism, which is the underpinning of the Rwandan genocide and the underpinning of all the genocides of the 20th century, of which Rwanda is the last one. That's what I did.
I'm reading a book now called Necropolitics, and I'm just on the section that transcends the technology of racism, or it takes the idea of a sovereign state to this idea of the technology of racism. It's very heavy thinking, but that you bring that up, and that it seems, if we reflect on what most wars, contemporary wars are about, it is that at its core. When it's not, how is solving that problem different?
Well, before we even pose the question of how to solve the problem, you have to grasp the enormity of the problem. The idea of race, racial difference, racial hierarchy, these ideas are the world's deadliest ideas. There is no other single set of ideas that has killed and maimed as many people as this particular idea. So it is baked into the way the world is built today, in its political structures, in its economic structures. So when we talk about addressing the problem, your solution has to be as enormous as the problem itself. Which is why Pan-Africanism is the only solution that I know to the problem of race. And that's why Pan-Africanism is not only for Africans. Pan-Africanism is really the counter, a different idea of human society, a different idea of the human being that is meant to change the world. For it to survive, for it to live, for it to thrive, the whole world must change. It's a most audacious response to this enormous problem. And it's only at the beginning of its great potential. And already it has freed billions of people from bondage. Already it has created space for civil rights. Already it has challenged the hierarchy of white supremacy across a range of fronts, from culture to sports to intellectual life to professional life. It is a potent set of ideas when embraced and refreshed and applied practically and with imagination.
Speak. I think because I'm on a Pan-African Progress mission, so we're definitely speaking the same language. So I want to ask about your Glocal speak. You said where you're local, you said where you've been, but you've lived in other places. When we met, you told a story about the most moves that you've made in a year, and that was setting up home in 2 different countries and operating within them. So first of all, tell us a little bit more about what that was about and how that came to fruition, but then also tell us about what your Glocal speak. So that's a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, where you've found yourself to be most local and where this idea resonates with you, and why you come to value it as a Glocal speak.
Well, in 2011, I was living in Washington, D.C., working for one of the think tanks, an Africa program in one of the think tanks. And my wife was pregnant with my daughter. It was winter, and we just felt so deeply alienated from feeling like Washington, D.C. was home. And between the winter, lugging around all the things that one must lug around in support of their pregnant spouse. And at some point, one day, my wife told me that we were not meant to be in Washington in such cold conditions, that we came from somewhere. And the way she put it was very provocative to me and was intended to get an instant reaction from me, which it did. And she put it, let's go home where you were meant to be a prince. This was potent stuff, because I'm no prince. I'm like a middle-class son of a nurse. And I've never thought of myself as a prince, but the way she phrased it, the promise of it, the power of it, so it was clear that I was not a local in Washington. Really, I was a local in Kenya.
Sure.
And so we went off and set up home in Kenya, and also a home in Ethiopia where my new job was going to be.
Okay, got it. So what is your Glocal speak? That you're meant to be a prince? Or?
No. In fact, in many ways, the local dimension has been what has been most probably missing in my professional life. I've worked mostly on national and global issues. The one time where I worked in a hyper-local way was when I was working for an intergovernmental organization in the Horn of Africa, headquartered in Addis Ababa, whose job it was to prevent violence between communities and raiders in the border areas of the 7 countries in the Horn of Africa. And that involved really very local solutions. That's as local as I went. Even the design of my life, one in working in counterterrorism and working in diplomacy, has mostly been, it has a local dimension, but it's mostly a bit distant from the local in terms of my own specific personal effort. So I always feel a little cut off from the local professionally, even as I live in the local personally.
Really? Okay, but let's take it to the street level because you walk the streets, you talk the talk, you interact with people. So something that maybe here in New York, maybe in Kenya, that you hear that just makes you realize that you're in place there.
Well, in New York, this has been really a revelation to me. One is that our work at the Africa Center we have a civic responsibility and a civic aspiration. We serve the people of New York, especially the Harlem community.
Okay.
We're the Africa Center, so we try and work at the very local level to bring together the different African communities in Harlem and in New York together, convene them around different themes and for different reasons, all the way from art and cultural events to business and policy. And we try and do that with a lot of thinking about the local effect of what we're doing.
So you're here.
Yes, I really do live here. I really do live here.
Okay.
And that's a big change because for the first 4.5 years in this second coming to New York, I was a diplomat to the United Nations. And even though I was driving through New York and I lived in a house in New York, I was not in New York. I was in a bubble that is outside of New York. So this feels like a entry into just the beautiful New York that I've always loved.
Okay. Akwaba. Or welcome, as we say.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you brought up the UN, and I think for many people, what the UN does is this kind of mystical, like, part of, this big meeting comes once a year to New York, and then it happens other places, et cetera, et cetera. So if you were to kind of break down the UN 101, right, for, our lay listeners who just don't know, tell us about the experience of being in the UN system and what you saw from the outside before even entering it.
Well, what I saw from the outside, this last time I came to be a delegate to the United Nations was the second time I was being a diplomat to the UN.
Okay.
I started my government career being our ambassador on environmental and housing issues at the UN.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The UN is 193 countries debating every manner of issue from climate policy to security and attempting to find solutions that can be agreed to by 193 countries. So it's an enormous and very important talking shop. Most of the time what it does is it is the world's best place to take the pulse of humanity. Because with 193 delegations, each guided by reacting to the issues going on in their country, you get a really good sense of what the world is thinking and feeling. So the 193 representatives of all of these countries are also competing against one another. They're competing to see how their view of the way a matter should be resolved can win over more support than other delegates' view. So in a way, it's like the Olympics of diplomacy.
That big talk shop.
It's a big talk shop. It's a very big talk shop. Yeah.
Yeah. And so comparing that to, say, because the way I understand your role, particularly with the peoples of African descent, that has a relationship with the African Union to a large degree, or does it not?
It's a United Nations body.
Sure.
Created by the General Assembly.
Yes.
And it has 10 members who are voted for by the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. And our job is to consult with people of African descent on the issues they find of greatest importance to them, and in particular, how racism is affecting them materially, politically, and psychologically. And then to take their recommendations and find ways to feed them into the United Nations system, and especially into the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. And then once having done that, hopefully it shapes the way governments and the global system respond to racism and also the opportunities that come from greater inclusion and respect for people of African descent.
I guess I should rephrase my question, because what I'm looking to understand is, from what you've just described, we have a body that is the African Union, which is not the same as the UN, but it is some functions are similar. And so to the extent of when it comes to that implementation, so you have people agreeing XYZ, et cetera, the African Union has taken charge of this idea of reparations and reparatory justice this year in particular. And so in your work in the UN, do you see, or is there any, straight path to the work that can eventually be done in the African Union or a similar body, say, elsewhere in the African diaspora?
Yes, I mean, we're working hard to align our efforts to the African Union. The people of African descent, Africa's diaspora in the Americas, in Europe, all over the world, are very anxious to connect more deeply with Africa and to root their aspirations for equality and prosperity to the rise of Africa. And this is one of the key features of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism in many ways rose in the diaspora and inspired Africa. But Pan-Africanism has always understood that the enduring strength and safety of African descended people lies in a strong Africa, an independent and prosperous Africa. So in that way, we try and take the work we're doing in the Permanent Forum and coordinate it and engage it with the African Union. One of my big campaigns is to hold one of our formal annual sessions in Addis Ababa, in the African Union headquarters, and so have people of African descent traveling from all over the world to meet in the halls of the African Union to deliberate on how their aspirations can be realized by a closer communion with African states and African people.
We're looking forward.
Yeah, I'm very much hoping it'll take place. The African Union has, over time, become clearer and clearer about the importance of the diaspora, which it now formally calls the sixth region of Africa. There are 5 geographic zones, and the diaspora is the sixth one. And it is my belief that it is the spark of the sixth one, the ideas and the energy in this communion that will revitalize Pan-Africanism once again. And Pan-Africanism needs revitalization and renewal. Right now, it is not where it should be, but it's this communion between Africa and its descendants that's going to provide that renewal.
So I wonder, because I increasingly ask in my own research and just wanting to understand what people's mindsets are, particularly people who look as though, well, that might be a bad way to describe it, but if they are Pan-Africans. And I often get, particularly from the diaspora, like folks that are maybe from the Caribbean or from, mixed race or what have you, they struggle with that term Pan-Africanism. And so when you say it's new, it's just the beginning, the brand of Pan-Africanism, what's necessary? How do we, because most Africans can say yes, most, but when you start to get to the diaspora, there's kind of a roadblock.
Well, I think there's many associations with Pan-Africanism that sometimes painted as yesterday's philosophy, like it's our grandparents' political idea, not ours. There's ways in which it is identified with authoritarian rulers in Africa, or rulers who've not been, responsible in their governance. So there are people who feel that when the African Union meets, it's a meeting of authoritarians and corrupt leaders, etc. So there are negative identifications to Pan-Africanism. But Pan-Africanism is constantly renewing itself, and it's our duty now to make it more relevant and to make people understand it better. The way I put it is Pan-Africanism is simply a civilizational claim. It is not a geographic belonging. It is really a very audacious understanding of an emancipatory idea that is a reaction to hierarchical oppression on the basis of race, but that went beyond just reacting to racism and actually started finding these deep cultural and psychological connections among African peoples and found in them the basis of claiming or aspiring to unity. And that unity, it's an ideal. It's not to be realized in a sort of perfect, utopia. Rather, it's a constant striving. And just by striving for unity, even amidst all the disappointment that comes with striving for unity, you achieve so much. And I think many of the people who have a negative sense of the Pan-African should be encouraged just by being better informed of the enormous victories that this sense of unity and idealism has produced. This is not some theory on the sidelines. This literally is the reason today you don't sit in the back of the bus. It's the reason you have independent countries that are not under the yoke of European empire. It is the reason why across a range of disciplines, from Nobel Prizes to inventions to technology to business, people with chocolate skins are thriving. Even where there are disappointments, it's good to always come back to the victories because those victories are potent. Like to imagine that far less resourced African peoples 60, 100 years ago, in 1901 when there was a London Pan-African Congress, and then 1945 the Manchester one, these people had very little resource. They had no states they were in control of. They had very little money, but they took on empires and they won. That's the power of the idea. So for those who would look down on the idea, the question is, what idea do they have that allows us to be able to see the arc of victory, the arc of winning? And I mostly find they have either integrationist ideas or they've given up. And they're disguising their giving up by pouring the negative at Pan-Africanism. Let's criticize Pan-Africanism so that we can renew it. But to criticize it and dismiss it is to be left with very little as an African person.
And even to abandon it. So that is always my follow-up question. So what would you propose? And that's where the conversation just flails. Yeah.
And it's to understand that as long as white supremacy exists, not merely as a sensibility, but as a structure of power, then Black people need a response to it. And that response is very protective of you psychologically, very protective of you physically, and it is what holds the promise of overcoming the world's most dangerous and deadly idea, which is still alive. So I will drop my Pan-Africanism the day white supremacy disappears. And even then, it'll stop being an ism and just be a system of cultural existence, right?
Right.
It'll not need to be a political philosophy. It'll just be a cultural reality.
Right. And that's ultimately what I see it as. It is our cultural reality. So I think that might be the way to, but then again, that branding, that's culture. So to be continued.
And I also get that there are a lot of people who just have become so disenchanted with politics. So when they hear an ism, they draw away from it. Okay, leave the ism alone. You can settle into the beauty that is African people and the deeply different ways in which we face life and each other. The humane core of what it is to be African. Enjoy that. Be in it. It has so much food to give you, so that even if you don't want to do the politics, maybe politics are not for everybody. But to abandon Africanness is to abandon the best in yourself.
Yes. Spoken like a true diplomat. But I want to ask you, just given what has been happening, and I heard you saying it, and I've said this quite a bit with people, that we're truly in Africa in a crisis of leadership. And if we cannot come up with solutions that inspire young people to be better leaders or to even take on those roles, we're fortunate to have Traore right now and the Association of the Countries of Sahel doing their thing, but that's at a cost of some unity, right? So when you imagine how we get beyond this crisis of leadership and pick up the pieces of diplomacy that I feel is also quite broken, what does that look like?
Well, I don't want to be pedantic at all on this wonderful podcast. And I don't want to be lectury, but just to say that a lot of forms of rule and power and governance that govern over African peoples are not themselves African.
Exactly.
So, for instance, before this Pan-African idea ever came up, there were lots of groups and kingdoms and empires and nations in the continent known as Africa. Some of them were super murderous, super oppressive, and some of that continues to exist. But the Pan-African idea is a liberationist idea. It is an idea against domination. Its political arrangements are not democratic just by having elections. They are fundamentally democratic in the accountability of power, because the idea itself is liberationist. So the disappointments we have are not with African leaders. They are with the continuity of forms of power, one, usually colonial, but sometimes reaching into pre-colonial times that are also oppressive and authoritarian and even fascist. So the idea that there was some sort of innocent state of being before the Pan-African idea came to be is just historically inaccurate. It's that we can celebrate the greatness of Egypt. We can celebrate the greatness of Great Zimbabwe. But Pan-Africanism itself celebrates those accomplishments while being skeptical of forms of hierarchy and oppression, whether it's against women or against different social classes, because our idea itself is an idea of independence. At its core, it has independence. Now, how to marry that idea to the states that I have worked for, because I've worked for state structures, I've worked for deeply centralized state structures. That is the puzzle and the dilemma, because we essentially have to reinvent the state. We have to reorient the state at the constitutional level, at the political level, at the cultural level. And we have to do it while managing very real problems. So you have to change your car while you're driving it. You have to change the tires, change the engine, but you're still driving. And so that's why there's a crisis of leadership, and there will never not be a crisis of leadership, because what we're wrestling with is such an immense problem of how to make this switch. And that's why I say we're at the beginning. We are 100 years from the London conference, which is a very important conference. And we are reacting to a phenomenon that happened for 500 years and is still happening. And we're trying to take that whole history and bend it into this new civilizational claim, very new. And our job now, today, is not to, and this is why it's good to manage expectations. I will not see the Africa that I hope for in my lifetime. So my job is to think in ancestral terms. What am I supposed to be doing now that will set up somebody else in 30 or 40 years to move so much further? Just the same way in 1901, some people sat somewhere and set me up. So my job is just set someone else up. And then one day, I am pretty sure Africa will be what I imagine it could be. Yeah. But just to do that means to contend with disappointment all the time.
Such is life. Oh.
Such is life. Anyone who says life shouldn't come with disappointment,
they're off.
They're off. They don't get it.
Yeah. So why the where? You came back to New York. You're still kind of teetering on this UN and diplomacy side, but you've now kind of stepped more into the private sector. And so why the where? How did you now come to be living, working, and playing where you are currently here in New York?
Well, the Africa Center has always sort of sat in my imagination since I learned about it. And so my predecessor, Uzo, I sort of watched what he was doing. And when he decided that he wanted to go off to do something different after 7 years at the Africa Center, I decided to put up my hand and go for it. And it was really, for me, a complete switch professionally. I was going to get a new set of tools to do the job that I've been trying to do all this time. So it's just a new tool for the same old job.
Okay.
But now applied differently. Now it's not in the government. Now it is in New York. It is bringing together Africa and the diaspora. It involves engaging with governments, but it's a whole different approach. But it's really part of just the same problem and opportunity that I've been talking about.
Okay. We love it. And so what's going on there? What's new? We know that the center is in this building that has been in construction or waiting to be constructed. So what's new? What is the vision that you are in the near term looking to realize with the center?
Well, thank you. The Africa Center sits on 110th Street and Fifth Avenue, which is the northeast corner of the park. It's a precious, amazing property, 70,000 square feet or 6,500 square meters over 3 floors, 4 if you include the basement. And it's built to be a cathedral to African art.
Oh.
But the inside, most of it is unfinished. So we've got 2 working spaces that are finished on the ground floor. And it's taken many years to raise the money to continue building the rest of it. So I was very fortunate since joining the Africa Center since February to have raised enough money for us to restart construction. And we've basically restarted the construction process. So in 2027, we're going to open to this magnificent sort of hall, which is going to be the completion of the first floor, and continue building the rest of it. And this for me is such a personal challenge because building anything is difficult. Building in New York is incredibly difficult. It's such a huge learning curve for me. But I'm enjoying that it grounds my effort in the concrete, like literally concrete. And in that way, I see it as a legacy challenge to build a building for Africa at the heart of New York. And when African people come to the Africa Center for events, the one thing I hear all the time is they say, I feel at home. So we've reached out. We have a great naming strategy. We have great supporters, financial supporters. And amazingly, it's wealthy Africans who have stepped up the most, and the city of New York. We're also reaching out to African governments, and at least one of them has pledged to give us materials. We want you to walk into the Africa Center and the tiles beneath your feet are from Africa. If you touch wood, it's from Africa. It should feel that you are in Africa.
Yeah.
And it'll be our home. And from there, we can do such enormous good in deepening this communion amongst our communities.
We'll look forward to that.
Well, yes, I look forward to it.
Construction is not for the faint of heart, so I wish you well on that journey.
No, don't wish me well. Help me.
Oh, yeah, that too. That too. Okay, so we've spoken so much about who you are as this professional African. We also like to know more about how you hack your mindset, whether it's in the professional space or in your personal space. How do you change your mind? What is your mindset hack?
I think I'm constantly looking for ways to keep myself encouraged and keep myself having high morale. And the most important thing in my life is my children. And they are thriving. And when your children are well, almost anything seems possible. When they're unwell, no matter how good anything else is, it doesn't strike you as. So my children are doing great. They love being in New York. They're enjoying being here. That gives me such a great feeling about New York. To be more personal in terms of practice, now I run a lot. I exercise a lot. And I generally try as much as possible to keep within the company of people who reflect my ideals, people who I admire, people who I think are doing things that I look up to, that I learn from. And I find that if I do that, if I exercise and I'm healthy and I'm around the right people, my mindset is where it should be. And of course, the other part of it is my own invention called Steady Eye.
Steady Eye?
Yes, Steady Eye, trademarked.
Okay.
So Steady Eye is the ability to be in the presence of power and to retain your mind. So one of the things I've observed over the years where I've been around very powerful people is their power makes everybody around them behave differently. Like their jokes are a lot funnier than they really are. Their anger is a lot more scary than it really is. And it's because power itself has such an enormous psychological and emotional reaction in the people around it. To some, it draws them in, others, it pushes them out. But very few people are able to maintain their sense of self in its presence. So steady eye is the ability to do that. And no one is born with it. It's developed over time. And it's almost like vaccinating yourself against poisons, where you take little doses and build them up over time.
Sure.
And this ability is very important to any professional, actually anybody, because it's not about whether you will meet presidents and popes. There's power all around us, and we're constantly in touch with people and institutions that are very powerful. And so the ability to retain yourself allows you to maintain your goals. It allows you to maintain your sense of integrity with yourself, and allows you to continue in the face of this mind-bending power that's around you. And that's really what you need to do, I think, to be very successful if you want to have success on the basis of following your vision, as opposed to success on the basis of following the visions of the powerful.
That's great advice. Or it's a great tool or technique, because that's why they say power corrupts, right?
Yes.
Because if you do not have the fortitude within yourself to have that steady eye,
power corrupts those with power, and it also corrupts those around them.
Exactly. Yeah. More than not.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes it can corrupt those around them more than those who have the actual power.
Exactly. That's my observation, right? So when I look at the administrations of leaders that I've seen, it is the people around them that create the rot that is the leader in many cases, because the leader sometimes is actually really wanted to do good, right? But because those other operatives or players are on a mission that they believe will keep them in the place where they have some sense of perceived power, that's where the tricks happen.
And to have steady eye, you need to have in your mind a clear understanding of whose approval and respect you want.
Right.
And that's why the people who are near you and around you are so important. And I happen to I've had great friends, but one particular friend of mine who passed away a few years ago had such an enormous influence on me, because I admired him so deeply, and he lived with such fearlessness. So in some way, I could never, and even now that he's passed on, he set the standard for me of what living a courageous life of integrity looks like. So there's only that's very important in managing your steady eye, because it keeps you looking towards where you're supposed to be looking and away from the temptations. Trademarked.
Okay, Martin, that was one aspect of you being in where you get your mind right, and also things that you do when you're not working. But we also like to know if you're a reader, or you're a watcher, or you're a listener, and what are some of your reads, watches, or listens?
Yeah, well, I'm not as much of a reader as I used to be, but I still am a reader, and I tend to go back to old books that I've read before. I'm in a sort of repeating mood right now.
Yeah. But what do you mean not as much of a reader as you used to be? Because you had academics, but then tell us more about.
I was an enormous reader of literature and novels, like one or two a week type of thing.
Yeah, different times. A lot of time on your hands.
Yeah, I had more time, but also a lot more passion for it. I think I've become a victim of the screen, just like everyone else.
But you've also written a book, right?
No. I wrote my doctorate, and I owe someone a book, and I won't even get into that.
Okay.
But I'm reading now, and I'm reading a lot on that history between the 1890s and the 1960s.
Globally? In Africa?
In Africa. I'm very, very interested in the lives of our independence era heroes and the Pan-Africanists of the early 20th century. I'm interested in their social lives. I'm interested in how they managed to live with their political campaigns, what that did to their personal lives, how they tried to maintain themselves, what it did to their families. I noticed how many of them drank very heavily. They had really difficult family lives. And I'm very, very interested in reading about the cost of the work.
Yeah. 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 Interesting. Any titles in particular or any characters in particular?
A great book is Peter Abraham's A Wreath for Udomo. Peter Abraham's a great novelist, South African novelist. And A Wreath for Udomo is a novel set in London. And it has these pre-independence heroes, pre-independence sort of campaigners. And they're sort of living in London. But at the time, they're not presidents, they're not prime ministers. They're sort of just activists. And it just looks at their social lives, and it's hilarious. And Jomo Kenyatta is one of the main characters. He's older than all the rest of them, and he has these red eyes and huge temper, and his life is pretty messy. So
that's one to read.
I'm interested in that. Now, of course, I'm reading George Padmore and his debates on between Marxism and Pan-Africanism, and he goes from being a doctrinaire Marxist to being a Pan-Africanist. I'm very interested in his very strict way of living. And his disapproval of the looser, more fun ways that his companions had. It's all great fun finding out these tidbits about these people.
The human sides.
Yeah.
Okay. What's on your screens?
I just watch Apple TV. It's got a lot. I'm a lover of science fiction. So anything science fiction, I sort of will take a stab at.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But having said all that, I don't have a television. So maybe I don't watch as much as I think I do.
Where do you watch? On planes?
On planes.
On your phone?
On my phone, on
your
my computer.
Okay.
But your question is just making me realize that I spend an enormous amount of time working. Because I was just thinking of, okay, have I really watched that much? I'm watching, but really, I tend to be sitting at my laptop sending some sort of letter to someone or communicating with someone.
See.
Yeah.
Well, if it works.
Well, I'm of that generation where the work-life balance was not appreciated. And as a middle-class Kenyan, I was raised on that cocktail that you're supposed to work until you drop. It's terrible.
Well, we have a lot of values to transition as Pan-Africans, right? So that might be something that is part of the reimagining of what Pan-Africanism or what the Pan-African lifestyle is about.
And that's a journey. I think this journey of how I shape my life to better fit my mission, and for my mission not to undermine or even destroy my life, is something I've become really conscious of. I want to be well and to do well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Important. Well, Martin, I fully appreciate this time that you have allotted away from work to have this conversation. And so before we sign off for today, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I admire your podcast, and I'm very privileged to be on it. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for coming. All right, Glocal citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. Yes, do that. It's a good way to connect, to let us know who you want to hear from and how you want to hear it. And until next time, bye for now.